Welcome back, Mega Maniacs, for part 2 of the Commodore 64 Mini. As you can see, it is hooked up, plugged in, and working just the way I would expect it to. Got one simple menu here at the beginning to let you choose your region, and then it's straight to the games. And this is very reminiscent of the NES and the Super NES Mini, except for the fact that BASIC is here so you can actually program things, which does lead me to amend my suspicion that you could load games in part 1. I'm pretty sure that since BASIC is in there, you can actually load something from a disk drive, or a virtual disk drive, I should say, in the USB port. And as you can see, the joystick is controlling the menu, moving left and right, moving up and down to select things. And I'm pleased to see that there are also video options in here to pick which style of display you want. I will open up that menu and give you a look. You can do Pixel Perfect, PAL 4x3, NTSC 4x3, NTSC on a cathode ray tube, so on and so forth, etc. I think for me, NTSC 4x3 is going to be the aspect ratio that is not only the most true, but the most familiar feeling, so I'm going to go with that. And I'm going to start out this demo of the C64 Mini with a game that I never actually played as a kid, but I know is considered to be a classic to a lot of our European friends, and one that has a very excellent soundtrack by Mr. Hubbard, which I actually have a retro UK magazine disc of songs composed for the Commodore 64, and Monty on the Run is one of the songs on there that's been rearranged and reorchestrated. So you'll forgive me if I don't know what I'm doing in this game, because it is my first time playing this. I had a lot of Commodore 64 games, but some of the European games just never made it to the Midwest of the United States. So Monty on the Run was not one I was familiar with, and I really had no idea what I was doing here. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any kind of attack that you can do. I was hoping maybe you could push those flower pots off onto enemies, but they seem to be static. And the hitbox is very, very deadly. If you touch anything that's moving even the slightest bit, it kills you. And there's certainly no shortage of hazards in these stages. Like there, I was trying to jump over that moving teapot, and it got me. So, yes, I'm no good at Monty on the Run. That's going to take some work. But of course, with 64 games to choose from, I have no shortage of options here. Although I don't have a keyboard plugged in right now, so it's a little bit hard to enter my name at the moment, but I see that there is a virtual keyboard. By using the 4 buttons at the bottom of the joystick, you can emulate a lot of the functions that you would need, the return keys, the function keys, and it also lets you access the save states. And the nice thing is that it gives you a helpful little indicator when you're in the menus of which button to press of the 4 buttons to advance forward or advance back through the menus. So yes, they did include a manual, but as I suspected, you don't even need the manual to really be able to use this C64 stick and C64 Mini. And wow, I just picked up a new subscriber while I was working on this video, so things are progressing along. That should put us within 50 or less of the goal of hitting 1,000. And when we hit that 1K goal, there's going to be a special performance of Undertale music on cello and violin as a duet, so something to look forward to if the channel keeps growing at the rate it has been. Now, this is a game I am very familiar with from my Commodore 64 days as youth, both the original and the sequel, Jumpman 2. Now, this game, depending on who you talk to or whose channel you watch here on YouTube, gets credited for a lot of different things. Some call it the Commodore 64 reinvention of Donkey Kong. Some call it the Commodore 64 predecessor to platforming on Nintendo and Super Nintendo. It's widely attributed to just about anything you can think of, but quite frankly, I really prefer to think of Jumpman as being its own beast with its own dynamic. I mean, it's got girders and ladders, so I sort of see the Donkey Kong thing, but you're not rescuing anybody at the top of a stage. And in Donkey Kong, there are no bullets that are going from one side of the screen to another that immediately shoot at you when you cross their horizontal or vertical trajectory. So I would end the comparisons to other games right there. But it is definitely a platforming game, I will give it that much, where you are collecting gold rings and trying to stay on the platforms, because if you fall off or if you get shot, you lose a life. And it's amazing how just a simple screen of ladders, gold coins, and bullets, it can just mesmerize you for hours on end, because I played a lot of this game as a kid. This and Kickstart 2 and Pole Position and Pac-Man and Dig Dug and Galaga had a lot of really good Commodore 64 games. You'll notice that a lot of the ones I just named were arcade ports, but Jumpman and Jumpman 2 are entirely their own beast. Kickstart 2 as well. I don't think there was an arcade equivalent of that. And that's actually one thing that I do appreciate, though, about this C64 Mini, is that it's not just a bunch of arcade ports. It's actually original software for the Commodore 64, stuff that you either got on a floppy disk, or if you're in the European territory, more likely a cassette tape. Oh, well, I kind of grew weary of tapes after the VIC-20 era, because, I mean, even with a 4K program, and that was the limit of a VIC-20, 4K tapes could take a while to load. I couldn't bear the thought of loading games off tape on a Commodore 64, so with 64K built in, but only 38K of RAM accessible, just even trying to load a tape in would, I can't imagine how many minutes you would have sat there waiting, but it probably would have seemed like an eternity. And disk drives were notoriously slow in those days as well, but compared to tapes, a 1541 disk drive would be way faster. Here we have the non-pole position version of pole position on the Commodore 64 called Pitstop, and I did actually have both of these, Pitstop and pole position, but I think they each have their own strengths and weaknesses. For example, when you're playing Pitstop, you can go around the turns at higher speed, but the downside is you drift really hard when you're going at speed. Whereas on pole position, you can kind of let off the throttle or tap the brake a little, and you can still kind of inch your way around the turns without losing complete control of your car from one side to the other, and still maintaining some semblance of your speed. But I do like the aggressiveness of the drivers in Pitstop. In pole position on the Commodore 64, they're not really doing much to you, but in Pitstop, they're actually fighting you as you're trying to pass them. So, as I said, strengths in one, weaknesses in the other. And I think I'll just go ahead and point out here that you're seeing the 4:3 ratio. It's not taking up the full HDMI of my screen here, but I'm okay with that because it looks really good at this width. It's not stretched out and bloated and ugly looking, and I don't mind that it's letterboxing the black on either side. I mean, I'm going to get basically the same thing playing Genesis on the Analog Mega SG. There's going to be some sort of boxing around the screen if I maintain the original aspect ratio, or even if I manage to bump up the pixel size a little bit to, scale it up. I think it's just better to preserve the original look and have it look really crisp. And as for lag, I've heard some people say that the C64 Mini has a lag issue, but I'm not experiencing it. It feels 1-to-1 on the joystick, although this is not the joystick I would probably have chosen for my own preferences. I think it works fine with this C64 Mini. I think I can get used to it over time. And if you got some other sort of USB joystick, it probably wouldn't have all of the buttons that you would need to control the menu options. Although I'm sure you could get a programmable one that could take care of that problem, but it does the job. I just would have preferred the Wiko ergonomic grip as opposed to the ball and bat model, but it is authentic to the Commodore 64 era, so I have to give it that. And we've got a very nice selection here. We've even got a Commodore 64 Hall of Fame, which is a definite worthwhile inclusion that they're recognizing the history of the system and not just the system itself. There are a lot of people who made the Commodore 64 the best-selling computer of all time, and those people deserve their recognition, or at least best-selling in the 1980s. I don't think it still has that title now, but at one time, Commodore 64 was the home computer because it was affordable and there were tons of games and the games were really good. Now, the interesting thing about this one I'm playing here, Tower Toppler, is I also have it on Atari 7800. So I've got multiple ways to play this game. I don't think there are too many games you can say that about, except for some of the Epix games on here, like Summer Games. I believe there's Atari 7800 and Commodore 64, but that's not necessarily the normal. You wouldn't have found games on both of these systems in very many cases, but a few cases, like arcade ports like Asteroids and Pac-Man, those obviously came out on damn near everything. Now, Iridium, I haven't played before, but I know the game by reputation because I own a PlayStation 4 game called Futuridium, which is the spiritual successor. Only that one is played not flying left to right as you are here, but flying straight forward and straight back. And it's from a 3D perspective as opposed to a top-down perspective. But essentially, it's the exact same idea that you're trying to destroy all of these targets on these space stations by zipping back and forth along them and shooting at the targets and reversing direction and coming back and shooting more of them. The sound and the graphics are really excellent in both versions. Obviously, this one, the old school Commodore 64 style graphics, and the PS4 version completely changes the game, but at the same time, it's still basically the same game and the same concept. So I think this C64 Mini is a hit. I highly recommend it, and I'm signing off. Thanks for watching.